this might be my big thought of the day. In this quest to not do work over the weekend, which I think is a good thing, I realize I probably need to organize my week a smidge better. I think I was organizing my week with the assumption there was overflow into the weekend that I would just do. And now that I'm not really wanting to do the overflow on the weekend, I find that these things that I would have done just pile up. Like I'm not even responding to email. Like I'm just ignoring it. I'm just really making an effort just to ignore everything. I'm not succeeding every time, but I'm making an effort. That's the key, making an effort. I don't know. Where do you guys stand on that? Is everybody trying the same thing? Give yourself a break. Yeah. I feel like I want to say it's that time of year. I don't even think that's it. I just think it's just like I'm trying to create a new pattern for myself.
I think kind of my career focus has changed a little bit. Like when I was working in the elementary schools, like the public school system, I felt like there was always something to be done. Like you were never on top of it. There were always IEPs or reports or whatever, things to make, or, whatever, things to kind of organize. But now I'm at the university setting, and so much more of that responsibility is on the students, right? It's like, so in that shift, I've been able to kind of do more of that. Like, you know what, it's the weekend, claim that time, as my own, and not really do anything unless like that's the only time a group of students can meet for a project or something, then I'll do that. But I'm not planning things or organizing things unless I absolutely positively have to. But I have to say, it was a big shift for me, like mentally and emotionally, because I was so used to that. And so there was this sense of, well, I'm not doing my job, or I'm not doing it well. I'm not putting my whole heart into it. When really I'm preserving myself, I'm preserving, my mental health and my emotional, that sort of thing. So it was this, I kind of had to learn. Learn that, it's interesting. It's interesting. And then I was recently listening to, I think it was a news thing on NPR a couple of weeks ago, where there's certain businesses anyway that are piloting a 4-day work week. In many European countries, that's kind of their standard, but in the States, it's not. It's work, go. Right. And so there's some businesses that are kind of going to pilot that and see in terms of like, and I don't see why it can't be done but it takes training and kind of this sense of a different sense of organization. Like you organize yourself differently.
Yeah, you'd have to work towards that, right? Yeah, you'd have to. Yeah, it'd be a progression to get yourself there.
Right. Yeah.
I'm still working the progression away from 7 days down to 5. I'm still working that progression at this point. Right. I find it's interesting. The more consulting stuff I do, and like we talked a couple of weeks ago, this whole idea of consulting, those things, in order to continue work coming in, you have to do that work at some point, right? You got to do that proposal. I got to work on this. I got to work on that. And then balance that with the other work that I have to do every day. And it becomes definitely tricky. That's for sure.
My big problem is leaving home at home and work at work right now. There's just too much in both places going on. And I got my daughter and my husband down to lunchtime now. So, we're getting better there, but, there are just moments. We're planning a wedding, what can I say? But it's been tough. I come in now in the parking lot. I just sit there for a minute and I kind of put everything away if I can. But I can't do that. I don't do that when I go. Yeah, right? I don't do that though when I go home, and that's what I need to do when I go home.
So what I hear you saying, Lori, is that you propose the same thing they're doing in that TV show Severance. Is anybody watching that show?
No.
It's really creepy and it's really good, and I won't spoil it.
Creepy
but it's these people work at this company, and you get an implant in your brain that when you're there, you forget about your home life, and when you leave, you forget about work.
Right.
So you're
Right.
you're a proponent of that. All right, that's fair.
Well, not necessarily proponent, but that.
Creepy though.
Let's clarify that. but
All right, I put that on
trying-
you. I put
trying
that
to-
proponent
yeah.
part on you.
trying to and then the other problem I have is not sitting down when I get home, because then I don't get back up and do anything that I need to do at home.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's a good point too. That little winding down moment
Mhm.
leads to, all right, you
To-
know what? I'm good right here. I think this is a good spot for me.
Not a positive. I made myself a note of what I got to do when I go home before I sit down today.
Another note. I love it. I have
A
so
new-
many
new-
notes you can't, I won't even show
New
them to you.
attempt.
Yeah, I can't even. There's notes on top of notes. That's why your note got buried. There are notes everywhere here. It's insane. So, Amy, good to see you. I wasn't sure if it was you or if it was Mia stealing your identity one more week.
Hey, yeah, it's me. Good morning. Oh, good afternoon, right?
Good afternoon to you too. Good to see you. So what else does anybody want to talk about? Something coming up, something that you want to share with the group, that you want some feedback and some discussion? What's
Something
happening?
exciting I'll share with the group.
Go
I
ahead.
a faculty member in the elementary ed department invited me to submit a grant proposal with her, and it got accepted. And the focus of our grant is we have chosen from a pool of interested applicants, 10 students from the university who have disabilities. And we're working with them to write a narrative case of one of their experiences on campus, whether it's positive or negative, about their disability and maybe the accommodations they received or didn't receive, like that. That's kind of what the focus of ours. And then the idea is we're working with them this quarter to write their case narrative. And then she and I are going to compile them and put some information with it, review them, and kind of write some guiding questions, leave it very open-ended, some guiding questions. And then our plan is to have this set of documents that can then go out to faculty groups or staff groups that they can review these cases. And then they would have dialogues about what the issues were, how could it be solved, what could have been done differently, or, that sort of stuff, as a way to kind of get them to start thinking about their, as a way to get them to think about how they are dealing, kind of their thoughts or presumptions around working with students with disabilities. So we had our very first meeting on Saturday, speaking of working on the weekends or whatever, but that's the day that the students could meet. So we had our first meeting on Saturday, and there were 10 students, and oh my gosh, it was so amazing. Like, it was so amazing. These students, we have a variety of disability, issues. We have a variety of where they are in their course of study. So freshmen all the way to like 6-year seniors, sort of thing. All of a wide breadth of majors and that sort of thing. So we really tried to, within our group of 10, we tried to have quite a variety of people in it. And they have a lot to say. Like, it was so exciting to hear them and to hear I think it was just a bunch of word salad right at the beginning, because I feel like they feel so grateful to have somebody to kind of listen to. Yeah. And so they have we're going to meet together in a couple of weeks to go over their first drafts of each person is expected to do one case. And we decided at the onset, like the money that we got as for the grant, it's all going to the students to pay them for their time, right, to write these up. So they're going to be working on their narrative over this next week, and then next couple of weeks, then we'll come together. But the things that they had to say, of course, it's their lived experience, right? So, Debbie's background is as an elementary teacher, and then now she teaches how to teach science, in the college now. And mine is as an occupational therapist and AT person who's worked in the K-12 setting for my entire career. So we both have this idea of stuff, but they've lived it, right? These students have lived it, and they had a lot to say. So it was just so exciting. And we ended that meeting with them like just overwhelmed that this project is going to be better than we anticipated. Like, the outcome we think is really going to be better than we anticipated. And we're already thinking about how can we expand this idea just beyond Western, beyond Western's campus, like how can we expand it? Because I'm sure this is a need on several universities, like Western's not an anomaly in this.
Right.
So it's just a very exciting project to be a part
That's
of.
really
So
cool.
I'll
And
keep you
look,
all posted as we go along, but it's pretty cool to be able to
That's
give the students
awesome.
voice, and they're so appreciative of having their voice heard. So
Yeah, that's great. Question is it, I want to make sure I say your name right. Is it Smita? I see your hand up.
Yes, yes, I have a question for you. I think your project is really exciting, Natalie. And do you have racially diverse students? That's my question, because I'm really interested in race and disability in this country, because I find that people with disabilities are not represented in faculty, and their voices are not heard as typically as, forgive me for saying it, as Caucasian or white students,
Mhm.
right? I don't know whether you guys have seen that in your work, but in my work, I noticed that there so few racially diverse people when I go to these large conferences at the top. I'm just wondering if you have thought about that, and if have picked racially diverse students for your research, whether there would be a difference in their experience compared to the experience of white students.
Good question. It's a great question.
that's a really good question. And we had half the students met in person and half were on Zoom. I don't, with only looking at skin color,
Mhm.
with only looking at skin color, I would say they're probably all white students. We put up notices about it in the Disability Access Center, and and then we emailed it out to other groups on campus that were kind of more disability focused. We didn't necessarily target any like of the racially diverse groups. So we did not recruit specifically for that. And I will also say that we're a very, like Western is a very white, heavily white college. Like it could be much more diverse, but we're in Northwest Washington, and that's just kind of mirrors the population where we are. Your point is very valid, though. It is true. I mean, I think even just looking at maybe the groups of people that we were able to reach on how we advertise this is probably indicative of the fact that we, from what I could tell, it's not a very racially diverse group. I appreciate you bringing that up, though, because one of the things that we have talked about, depending on how this goes, like we've also talked about this very small kind of pilot study might lead into something larger where we might want to query more students. And so I've made a note of that if we were to expand this, like to do, part 2 of this, then definitely it would behoove us to be very worthwhile to tap into that, to get a broader, just a broader perspective and a greater voice.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that's so critical. I'm so curious to see how the work that you're doing could be replicated on other campuses as well, and then change and adjust as we tap into the communities that are on each of those campuses. I think that's really exciting. What do you think? What's the final product look like with this, Natalie? Like, what will be shared with the college community from this?
So what we're hoping is initially we would have 10 stories, basically, where of the student's experience. So student 1 is going to write their experience, and then but there won't be any resolution to it. And then we would have, and then accompanying that experience, that written out experience, would be some guiding questions, like that would foster discussion around a better resolution than the student leaving feeling hopeless that they're going to fail this class, And we had a sample case was shared, and in the sample case, the student had accommodations from the Disability Access Center. And the sample case was an actual student, it was anonymous, the names were changed and everything, but it was an actual student. She, wasn't quite sure how to handle this situation. She was afraid to disclose because she didn't want to be thought of as less capable than she was. She didn't want to be prejudged to get a bad grade, already going to get a lower grade or that sort of thing. So finally she, approaches the instructor. I want to talk with you about accommodations needed for testing. Oh, I don't administer tests in this class, so you don't need any accommodations. Okay. And so the student didn't know what to do with that. So the student turned around and left and just felt like, okay, I'm going to fail this class. Like that was the mindset of the student. So and the feedback that we got from the other students that were there that read this case also as an example of what theirs could be, were like, oh, this is my experience. This is my experience. So I would imagine a lot of them will be similar to that.
Yeah.
So then the guiding questions are like, well, what are the issues here? What could be done differently? So we're hoping that there are several avenues for faculty discussion and like professional development type things within the campus here. We're also hoping, it sounds like there's a huge disconnect between the Disability Access Center and really what people understand their role is. What faculty don't understand what accommodations are. I don't think students understand really what the limitations of the Disability Access Center has in terms of resources and that sort of stuff. So we're just, my pie in the sky is we open the floodgate and all these issues come out and people are like, what do we do with this? And then we start, having to make some change around this, but it would be faculty discussion, talking with the DAC, how can we make this transition a little more easy for students coming into campus? Because that's a huge thing, right? Not they all, but a lot of students come with IEPs where the IEP has been managed for them. And then all of a sudden they're at the university and they're responsible for all of it. And so the public schools haven't helped them figure out that shift.
Right.
Then there's students who don't get a diagnosis until they're already here, right? So they don't have the IEP protections. So then the DAC is like, well, we need these documentation, we need this documentation. Well, where, that sort of thing. So there's all these nuances that we're hoping to kind of start opening the door to conversations with.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking, I would like, because there are so many people who don't even know, there's faculty, staff, and students who don't even know universal stuff, just some universal tools out there that everybody possesses. So one of the things that we talked about in our group on Saturday is at the center sponsoring like drop-in sessions, like, and advertising it like mad, like having drop-in sessions. Do you need support with written? Do you need support with writing or whatever? Come learn how your computer can help you with that. And then maybe, so kind of advertising that a little bit more. And because there's so many students who don't even know what they struggle, but they don't even know that there's the device that they hold in their hand can help them. Right.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
So yeah, it seems like there's
it's
a lot
so interesting. I think you're going to see those themes though, right? Those themes, those commonalities of stories where, someone's going to bring something up and every head is going to nod. And then, that's some systemic, bigger picture issue that needs to be addressed in some way.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
That's cool. That's really cool. That's exciting.
Yeah.
That's great.
Really
all right, well, keep us posted as this goes.
I will keep you all posted. Yes.
Yeah, that's really, I think that's wonderful. Exciting. Love it. Anybody else something to share? As you're thinking about things to share, I'll throw this little nugget on the fire as well. We had a lot of participation with these special events the past couple of weeks. And I'm wondering if people have ideas of topics you would like to address going forward. And we can then put the call out for people to facilitate part of that conversation. And so we can have a component, one of the hallmarks of this group and one that I've clung to throughout is that there is no plan. I don't know, it just kind of happens, just, and an hour goes by and we shake our heads and we leave. We're like, all right, cool. but we can have a little structure to this if people feel like that was helpful, because those were really good. And that brought knowing ahead of time what a topic might have been, gave us a chance for people to A, put it in their calendar to join us, and B, come prepared to have part of the conversation. So, you know, as Karen jumps on, it's very similar to our AT chat where there is a topic that certainly doesn't limit conversation, but it does focus part of the conversation.
Well, you know, I mean, what I'm thinking, and so I'm Kelly. I work in right outside of Austin, in a K-12 school district. And, you know, this is the time of the year where I'm kind of thinking about like the year at a glance, and I'm thinking ahead, right? And I mean, I do have something that a colleague from another school district had given me, about kind of thinking that, you know, thinking out ahead for that year and what kind of needs to happen during those different segments of the year. But I don't know, I think that's a really useful topic, is talking, you know, for those K-12 AT specialists and trainers, and is kind of thinking about what does it look like a year at you know, glancing at the year. And like right now I'm trying to finish, you know, spending any money we've got for our AT budget, but also thinking about, like, one of the things I'm thinking about is, you know, I live in a fast growth school district and we're growing rapidly. And like, what are all the things that I need to think about as I anticipate growth? And think about like just practical things like our inventory and how we do more capacity building as we grow. And, you know, so I don't know, those are kind of some of my thoughts that are on my brain right now.
I think that is it. We are in the right time for that, Kelly, that idea of, okay, this year is coming to a close. How do we A, put a bow on this year, and B, look forward to next year? And how does what happened this year inform what we do next year? That kind of
right. Some of those practical aspects that, you know, sometimes that ends up like you're in survival mode, maybe day to day, just trying to get things done.
Yeah.
But I think now is the time where we may have, in this summer, some time to think about and be thoughtful about how is this year going to go? And what do I want to see happen? And how can I be thoughtful and about as we grow, what are the needs going to be, and who are the stakeholders, and who can I partner with? And yeah, so.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. That's kind of a reflection / planning, reflecting on this year, planning for next.
Yeah. And I'd love to hear like how other people across the country do it. So.
Okay. All right. We'll throw that on the agenda. And we don't have an agenda at this point, so this becomes the first thing on the agenda. Great. We'll put that on for a future week as people start thinking about that, because you're right, that is the perfect time to start doing that. Awesome. Anybody, when Kelly brings that up, any thoughts that come to the surface for you of strategies you use to reflect on this year that help you start your planning for next year? We could start having that conversation now if you guys are interested. What does that look like? Oh, no one's reflecting.
It's
No
always
one's
great
planning.
to reflect
Oh.
and see what worked, get some feedback from others as well, to do some data. What impact did it have? Did our strategies make on our, did it have an impact? Because that's an important piece. Does anything even work? I'm sorry.
Yeah, right. Does anything even work? Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I do have another idea, wait, let's see if other people have thoughts about Kelly first.
I'll come back, Karen. I'm writing it down. Karen idea. I won't forget. Anybody else other thoughts on Kelly's
And how do you reflect?
yeah, your reflection piece?
Well, I can say for our school district, one thing that we did this past Friday, and it's kind of at the end of the year for us, is there are things that come up when we're in the schools that make me stand up and say, okay, how are we going to address this? Like with our 504 coordinators, not we had a meeting on Friday with them to show them accessibility features that were part of a Chrome device and Snap and Read. And not one of them knew that these are features that we have with every student. So it kind of determines what we're going to have to do a little bit differently for the fall to address that, because, you know, we can go out there and assist them, but in the global scheme of thing, we've got to enable them to be able to know how to support their students, and bringing that to the school and saying, okay, now that we've shown you, you've got to share this with everybody, because there's only 2 of us. We cannot cover 33 schools and be able to, you know, impact that type of thing. So it's those type of things that I kind of think about that are happening right now on how we're going to have to plan for the future.
Yeah. And that one, Susan, that's such an interesting one. And it happens to all of us. Did you see how many heads started nodding? Like, oh yeah, like I've had that happen too. Because that simple introduction and empowering them to understand deeper about what support students have, will have a direct impact on the service they provide come day 1 next year. So we almost can't even wait till next year to start doing those things. Those things have to happen before that, because those students are going to come back on day 1 and they need supports right away.
Exactly.
And so it's this idea of, you had people have an aha moment, like, oh, wait a second, that's pretty great. Why don't I know this? And then it's the question of, how do I find an intermediate moment to re-engage them on this same conversation, so that when day 1 comes of school, they are more prepared. It's always that thought of, how long does an aha moment last for in people? Right? It's that they had those, that, oh yeah, well, I could use that for everyone. When does that go away? And unfortunately, those go away pretty quick, I bet. That's my guess. And I'm not usually that negative, but I feel like I'm pretty on target with that, is that I think those have a pretty short shelf life, those aha moments, because work continues on and they get pushed down until they are reintroduced another time. Like, oh, remember that thing we talked about. And so, with Susan's, their way to take that same chunk of information and just give it to them in multiple formats repeatedly as we go forward. Amy likes that. She's like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Right, Amy?
Yeah, when I was a lead for a district, I made like a reference page. It was using one of the platforms that the district had available. And basically I would put all the resources. I'm SLP background, but I also provided support for different reading and writing supports as well. And I would basically put all of the resources and websites and videos, how-tos all together in one place. That way I would provide the support locally, going to the schools, doing the trainings, but then I can also say, if they ever follow up with an email, I could say, hey, go here. It really does wonders, just for time, and them always having it available. They can always go back to it, like you were saying, and revisit the information that they forgot, or just time, like everyone has, is limited.
Yeah, and if you make these into one kind of landing point, a website that has all these resources, and you just keep pushing them back there, eventually that becomes part of a habit. Like, oh, I'm stuck, but oh, they made this website, I should try there first. And then, one of my favorite things to do is to put those things in my signature of my email for the schools. Like, I have a couple schools that I contract with, and the link to that resource is in my signature. When they email me and I email back, it's like, have a question about AT? Check here first. We might have already had like a training about, and then it gives them all those resources. And then if they don't find it there, then follow back up. But at least it gives them a first step. Yeah. Those are cool. That's a good
And
idea.
as far as planning, I know you were talking about meeting the needs of your district and it's growing very quickly. I try to set a plan for myself and then realistic action steps. What can I do with the time that I have now? I know this is the ultimate goal, but you really want to make it doable for yourself. So, okay, what things do I really, what concerns need to be addressed priority because it keeps coming up? And then just kind of setting it up for yourself to make yourself feel better. Because I know for me, I came into a district, it was not as organized and I found myself very overwhelmed, like, oh my goodness, I have so much I need to do.
Right.
So I think the more that you kind of break it down for yourself and kind of make a plan, that's what's really going to help you too.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too. I mean, how many times, do we get overwhelmed? If you were here before I started the recording and Lori asked for the thing I promised her 3 weeks ago, it landed up in this pile right here, and it got lost. And so again, it's that idea of thinking about how we prioritize. I always look for in schools, what is the biggest bang for my buck right out of the gate? Like, what could I address the largest number of needs with quickly, and then continue to build on that as we go. And I think that's a really good point, understanding your group and who you're working with and what works for them. Susan, you got them. Now you got to hold on to them. All right, Karen, I heard you have an idea.
No. I mean, an idea we've done this in the past with Bridget Nicholson. She has simplified the online assessment for writing methods. So maybe she'd come back and do a demo on that because it's, if anyone is looking for how you can make informed decisions about writing tools, her tool is excellent. It's an online tool and she's simplified it. It was, if anyone used it in the past, she simplified it. It's just an awesome tool to help guide recommendations around written expression.
Yeah.
What
So
is her name again?
Bridget Nicholson, she's out of Illinois. She does a lot I mean, she's a very well experienced OT and assistive tech specialist, and her website is typingtraining.com, and it was part of that, but she has now taken the OAWM out of that and made it much simpler to use. So it really helps guide our recommendations around written expression.
Yeah, it's
And
really.
how sometimes parent, you might say, go for, word processing, and parents are like, no, I want them to learn how to handwrite. So it's the same sort of thing like the PAR, which guides reading recommendations. So this is a similar tool for written expression. I also have a question. Is that okay, Mike?
You have a question? Are you asking me if it's okay? Sure, of course.
So I actually had to work with a group this morning, an 18 to 22 program at a college level. And what do you recommend when, and this could be middle school and high school as well, what does everybody recommend when learners have to do research projects and they annotate and they save? And so I'm just wondering what kind of strategies and what tools other people use, because I know what I use and what I recommend, but I'm wondering, is there something else that I'm missing?
I've had really good success with students using Google Keep as a strategy to organize their notes for a research project. And so each area of the research project was a colored note and a certain label. And so as they found little pieces of information that they thought fit in certain areas, they would code it that way when they saved it, and then use that later when they were working in Google Docs.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Anyone else? I mean, what I've been recommending is Digo because of the annotation capabilities. And again, you can color code it. And so I think maybe a combination of Google Keep and Digo, or one or the other. So I think it's the point of showing options and seeing which one works better for a particular learner.
I think something that gives them that ability to move through websites and pull stuff quickly becomes really critical for that.
And retrieve it easily.
And thank you. And then that backside of it, actually retrieve it and use it in some
Yeah.
way.
One of the
I-
things I love, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Kelly.
I was just gonna say, our school district, of course, we have a snap and read for all of our students. And so we use that outline tool
Yeah.
for research.
Yeah.
And so but I know that's something you have to pay for.
Yeah, yeah. But again, that's another option as well, if your district hasn't invested in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
For
'cause-
districts that use more Windows than Google, with OneNote, there's a linked notes option. So if you have like a guiding document, you can link your searches to that document so that like the sources are saved and that sort of thing. So if there's any, materials, they can be saved in that OneNote section, and then any searches or that sort of thing can be also linked to whatever part of the project it is. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way
Yeah.
to look at it too, that idea of OneNote. And I always think I don't use OneNote enough. It's just not my first go-to tool. But I think for a research project, the way OneNote organizes might make a lot of sense for people. That idea of notebook and chapters and dropping resources in as you go might give it a nice structure, similar to what Kelly was saying with using the outlines from Snap and Read. That same kind of idea, giving it.
Yeah.
I always think that's one of the downsides of Keep when using it this way, is that Keep, when you're writing notes in Keep, it's a little loose because your notes are mixed in with other notes. And as long as you are color coding them and tagging them correctly, you will be able to find them, but they don't live in Keep in a nice kind of organized fashion. It's just a hodgepodge of stuff. And so it does rely on the user to be really specific about using what you've decided, whatever system you've created for them. And if a note doesn't get a label in it, suddenly that note is just gone. I mean, they might not see it again. They may scroll through and find it eventually, but on a first glance, it might just be out. They might not ever see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Just curious what other people were recommending as well. And I know some high schools invest in some tools as well. I don't even know what they're called, but I've seen them in the past. But again, it's, once kids graduate, they don't have access to those paid subscriptions.
I think you could probably use Wakelet in kind of the same way you were mentioning Digo. I think a Wakelet could do the same thing for you. If Alyssa was here, she'd be smiling right now. But I think a Wakelet would do that really nicely, in that you could create sections in a Wakelet and then drop any resource in you find underneath it, including writing notes to yourself within there.
Yeah. So it's probably, a combination thing. I mean, Digo, because you can add notes, you can color code, and you don't have to go back to the original article, because it just pulls all of those annotations right out, which is really nice. But yeah, I mean, there's options.
Yeah. I think Wakelet, even Padlet, right? That same idea. And I almost picture a Padlet with like columns, and each column is a section of the research paper. And then I just keep dropping resources in underneath it and just populate it that way.
Yeah, I think, and Natalie, are people being taught how to use OneNote effectively? In your
I can't
experience?
speak to that at the university. I mean, I don't know if students attending the university here know, but I do know that when I was working in the K-12 setting, I worked at a Microsoft district. And so they had, teachers were using it, not every teacher. Again, like there's always that caveat, right? But
Yeah.
I do know a lot of teachers who were using it as kind of like almost like their classroom management system, for their coursework or whatever. And they were, and I would get asked often, because I would talk about it and they would invite me to come. Well, can you just share it with my whole class? And I would say yes. I mean, anytime I was offered, I said yes and did it.
Yeah.
And so, so I would say, again, it depended on the teacher and it depended on how they were managing their classroom. But yes, there were teachers who really the organization helped them also manage that content. And so, so then they wanted their students to do it. And then that would be part of the assignment, turn it in on OneNote, you know, turn it in this way in OneNote or whatever. So they kind of built that in terms of how they manage that information. I will say it's not the most intuitive, like, so if you don't have a lot of experience with Microsoft-y kinds of stuff, it might be like, you might have to watch a couple YouTube videos about it or something, or find somebody who can, it doesn't seem as intuitive. You kind of have to work with it a little bit, but it's a really great organization. When I used it a lot for my own record keeping, when I was doing OT and AT, all that information for just my own stats and my own, you know, stuff, I used OneNote all the time. So.
Yeah, Karen, are you seeing students being trained in these processes?
No.
Yeah,
No.
I knew the answer before you even said it, so I'm just curious what you were going to say.
That makes sense. I mean, because when I was sharing earlier, you know, it's like these students at the university level don't know a lot of these tools and strategies, because they're not really being taught at the, especially at high, you know, really they should need to be started at middle school, but they're not, you know, at the very latest high school classes, and they're not being shown these things then, because they have to be responsible for managing their own stuff when they come to a college or university. And so part of it would be some of those strategies, you know, for organizing the information and managing how they're going to get all that stuff done. It just doesn't happen.
The other thing, a lot of schools are Google schools, and they use Google Classroom and then they go to college and it's all Office, and it's brand new to them and it's confusing. So, and plus they might be using Blackboard as their, you know, some other.
Or Canvas or something like that.
Canvas, yeah. Canvas is more intuitive, at least, but.
I like Canvas a lot. Yeah, I'm using that for my class now. I really like it. But it's different if you don't have experience in it, and someone says all your class materials are suddenly in this thing, you have no idea what they are, and how to navigate it. Which is what they did to me as an instructor. They said, you have to put all your stuff on Canvas this year. And I was like, oh, okay, I've never used Canvas. And so I had to learn it in order to put the stuff up there. And luckily my students were very open in their critique of how I was setting up my class, and it helped me be better, and that's fine. I can take it. But it did help though, because there was questions all the time. Well, why are you putting it there? That makes no sense. I'm like, I don't know. It made sense to me when I was doing it the afternoon of class. It made perfect sense. But no, I think it over time, it became very obvious of how to set it up. But yeah, there was a process of learning that, just like anybody else.
I think that really encapsulates why it's so important to talk about the feature or the strategy and not the tool, because they might be a Google district and they're going to be transferring to a Microsoft university, but do they have the strategies of organizing their information and storing it and filing it and knowing how to compile it all and regurgitate it back out? So I think there are times when you do want to teach something specific because at that moment, that's what they need. But if they had that whole process down, there wouldn't be as huge a learning curve, because they're only learning the new tool or software. They're not learning the process on how to organize it all. Does that make, I feel like
they're
I'm not
learning
making
what
myself
that
clear, but
tool. Yeah, they're learning what that tool calls that feature.
Right.
Not
They're
learning
what that tool
that
calls that feature.
does
So
for
if they
them.
already know how to organize their thoughts and synthesize and blah, 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 it doesn't matter what platform they're doing it on.
Right.
And so, because chances are before they are said and done, they're going to experience different options that way.
That's why there's some value in calling, in the language you use when you talk about these things. Google Classroom is a learning management system. Canvas is a learning management system. They are two different systems, but they are performing the same task for you. They're a centralized place to put your information and get your information. And sometimes those connections are not made. Digo or Wakelet, people will say, well, I don't use those. I use social bookmarking tools. Well, both of those are technically social bookmarking tools. And so it's this idea of having this common language that people can understand. To this day, I still, struggle when students are not familiar with what they're using for text to speech, and they can't associate the text to speech feature with a different button on another system. Like, well, it's an ear over here. Why is it a speaker? I don't know. Same thing. It's giving you sound out. It's the same feature, but the button is different. So instantly, I don't know what to do. And part of that's because the feature has not been described. It's just a push this button and it will talk. Okay, well, now I went here and there is no button like that. So I guess it doesn't talk. Well, no, of course it does. It has this other button instead. So interesting. Right.
It's interesting when we talk about transition, Natalie, into the higher ed, because one thing that I try to do when we're having kids get into high school is the realization of what tools they're going to be able to use in higher ed. I had a meeting last year with a student that is totally blind, and the parents didn't realize that maybe not all the material is going to be in Braille. And having that accessibility stuff. So what's next? How can these colleges support those students and do that, have that conversation? Because we have a transition specialist that handles a lot of that, but I don't think all the parents really understand what that looks like at higher ed, and making sure that they're prepared for all this stuff. Because we really need to be talking about that and having that conversation, probably at middle school, because it's going to take them that long to be able to make that transition. And we talk about what they want to do in middle school, and what they think their future is going to be, because they have somewhat of an idea. So start talking about all this.
This would be a good topic, Mike, for your non-agenda.
My non-agenda transition planning.
And when I was in the public schools, I wanted to start this pilot that it never really took off, because then I left and took my current position. But I went into one of the special education teachers at the high school had a vocational readiness kind of class. And so it was much more not necessarily for those who were going to plan to go into college, but those who just needed to know about how to live outside of high school. And so we talked, and I said, it'd be great to have part of this class be the self-determination and advocacy, and knowing what tools they use, what features they need, so they know how to advocate for it and that sort of stuff. Right. So we started that, and I, she had several guest speakers. So I was a guest speaker of that class for like 2 or 3, sessions, and kind of started that process. And it was great. Like, the students really appreciated it, because some of them didn't even know why they had IEPs, really. I mean, sometimes they're left out of that conversation. Yeah. And the other thing that came brought up is some guy was like, one of the students was like, well, I'm planning to go to the military. And don't you have to take, I guess you have to take tests, to go to the military. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was an area I hadn't thought about. None of my family's like been in the military at all. So that's an avenue I hadn't really thought about. It's like, oh, well, what do they allow? What accommodations do they allow, if any? And then how does that work for somebody who wants to follow that track? And so, so sadly, I don't know what ever happened with any of that, because, I only got to do it that one spring quarter, but I think there's a need for that sort of thing in the secondary portion of public schools, so that just that agency and that self-determination can be developed in those young adults.
Yeah, I think it is critical. And I think we see more of that now. I think there are more transition, I'm going to call them transition coordinators, transition positions in high schools. How about I'll say it that way. And I think that certainly helps, looking to connect to your state voc rehab agency, who is supposed to be part of that transition conversation. And so thinking about what that looks like, but I agree 100% with what everybody said. This idea of finding some way to prepare these students for whatever that next step is. And some of it is just kind of, like you said, Natalie, taking stock of what it is that you do that makes you successful. What are the things you do? And interesting that you talk to some students and you know what they use in class. So if there's students that I work with, I know what they use. But asking them to describe it to me is sometimes very painful. And it becomes very obvious very quick that you're right. They don't have a sense of what these things are and why they're using them and how that would translate to something outside of school. I always go back to one of my students that I work with who said he was so excited to graduate because when he graduated, he'd never have to see me again to help him with tech. Hurtful, but I get over it. But I keep bringing it up, so maybe I'm not over it. He wouldn't have to see me again and he would never have to read again. And I said to him, no, that is so far from the truth. Me, you might not ever see again. Yes, that part's true. But you're going to read every day of your life. And if you don't have a strategy as you go forward, you're going to wish that you liked me more because I could have helped with that. But just preparing them to go forward and understanding what accommodations they use in order to be successful and what that looks like on the outside. I'm a big believer of when I'm start working with students that are juniors and seniors in high school, I'm not working on school accommodations anymore. I'm working on life accommodations with the assumption that this is just going to continue to follow them over. And so maybe a de-emphasis on the things that the school has purchased and a higher emphasis on things that live on their phone or are free that we can start looking at in the community and that they can access so that they understand how to move forward with that to get that same level of support. Or maybe make that realization that, hey, just because Snap and Read's on my brain because Kelly said it, hey, I use Snap and Read all the time and that's really important to me. So I'm going to buy it for myself when I get out of school. And that's fine too. If that's an answer, that's a perfectly fine answer. But understanding the value of those tools becomes really critical as they start to figure that out. Yeah, we're working with students to create this kind of like this accommodation kind of toolkit that they would store in their Google Drive so that when they went out in the community and someone asked them about tools they might need to be helpful or things they need to be successful, instead of having to rely on just pulling that out of memory, they could revisit it from a document or slides with pictures and descriptions of things they've used that have helped them be successful. And I found that always helped because it didn't rely on instant retrieval of that information when they were out in the community, and they were probably nervous anyway, and they were probably in a situation that was not common to them. And then on top of it, you ask them to retrieve out of their head things that they use to be successful. So it gave them that little bit of a security. It was like a security blanket of knowing that that stuff is there. You could just have it open on your phone and say, oh, I use this. If I encounter text, I use the app on my phone to read it to me, or I take a picture of it and it reads it to me, whatever it might be, but giving them some rationale of how they could share that information with people in the community, with any location, wherever they went, whatever their transition was, work, the military, school, whatever it was, community living, just understanding how to navigate through that. Like Karen was mentioning her group that she was just talking to, in that middle age group there, that 18 to 22 kind of transition age, how to equip them with the tools that they can use to be successful. I love that. That was one of the first grants. Speaking of grants that we got, that was one of the first grants I got when I was an independent consultant. It was through our AT Act, was to create a curriculum called Technology Beyond the Classroom. And I would go to these 18 to 22 transition groups in the community, like the ARC and some other disability organizations, and work with the individuals there. I would always call them students, and they would remind me they were young adults, and then I would have to shift and I would call them students again, and we would go through this every day. But this idea of empowering them to use the tech they had to be successful and to be independent. So it is a process, that's for sure. All right, so I have some things. Look, here's 3 things on my list. You can't see it, but I'll say, look, there they all are. 3 things that I can plan some special events as we go forward. If one of them hits you at some point, shoot it over to me in an email, because we'll start planning those. I'm glad Karen brought up Bridget and the writing evaluation tool, because Karen and I had spoken about that before, and I was supposed to reach out to Bridget and I forgot. So this is good. It's back on my list now. I'll put that on there, and we'll try to set her up as well. All right. Other last thoughts before we wrap up? 2 minutes early. Go do something with that 2 minutes. I don't know what it is, but go do something with it. Enjoy it. All right, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Have a good week. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.